Thanks for the panel on innovation. We have one more panel to wrap up the day, and I think it's an appropriate topic to really think about climate change as a leadership issue. All of you who are in MBA programs are the future leaders of organizations, and you will have the chance to bring that leadership to bear as you engage in your career over the next 4 or 5 decades. I'd like to welcome our panel for the final conversation of today. We have Lord Michael Hastings, Global Head of Corporate Citizenship for KPMG International, Jim Rogers, former CEO and Chair of Duke Energy, and one of our star professors, Aaron Chatterji, who teaches strategy here and is an expert in CEO activism. I think the three of them can help bring some of the leadership lessons and imperatives to bear. So I'll turn it over to you. Thanks, Ronnie.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks to all the organizers. In terms of efficiency, this is a different kind of efficiency. This is pretty good. That was the quickest transition between panels that I've ever seen or participated in. This is awesome. So since we only have a half hour and we're wrapping up the conference here, I want to get right to hearing from Michael and Jim. The big question is about leadership. You know, when I listen to all these panels, it's exciting and inspiring to think about the markets we need to create, the institutions we need to change, the people we need to bring in, the prices we need to set. But behind all that, you're going to need to have leaders to make this a reality. And so I think that's what we'll focus this panel on. So Michael, you've been a leader in this space across different organizations. Maybe to begin, could you just tell us a little bit about one example where you led in the climate area and made change either within an organization or in broader society? And hopefully from that, we'll have a broader discussion about it.
Well, you began your question by saying you've been a leader, and I hope I am a leader still.
Yeah. Not the past tense, right? Well, past, current, and future.
But, well, current, and I hope all of the MBA grads here are going to be leaders as well. So track back 11 years, and I joined KPMG in 2006. Within a year, it appeared to me that we needed to take a big leadership step on this issue, and that was at a period of time when none of the big four, let alone any one of the other consulting firms, let alone most of the major banks, had any interest in managing, measuring, and reducing their carbon impact. So I took a proposition to the KPMG board, which I'll be perfectly honest, I had no idea how we'd do it, but never mind. We had to pick a figure. Accountants pick a figure, and we picked 25%. And we said, let's identify all of our carbon footprint across 155 countries and understand how we can reduce that by 25% by 2010. So we were giving ourselves effectively 3 years to do a 25% carbon reduction across the business. The good news is we succeeded, we passed, we got to 29%. The savings were monumental, the firm was delighted. At the same time, we were growing from 122,000 people to now 198,000 people. In total, if we add the subsequent 2 lots of carbon reductions, we've passed 40%. As a total, we've saved tens of millions of dollars on energy costs. We've had all of our major buildings restructured. When it comes here to the US, KPMG in the US is now aiming at, by 2020, 100% renewable energy for all of our 93 offices. And we began a worldwide program called Living Green and Global Green. So Living Green here in the US, Global Green around the network. And that meant that we were saying to everybody in the business, whoever came into the business, that actually you have a responsibility to reduce what you do, to manage carefully what you do. We don't produce big things that people see like widgets and machines and vehicles, but what we do is pump a whole ton of stuff up into the atmosphere because of the energy we consume in our buildings. And we had to persuade people that carbon impacts were not just about transport, which is the way people see it, or industrial production, but buildings themselves are mass consumers. And if we change our building structures, change our energy use structures, and change our travel structures, we could achieve a meaningful input. Having done that, it'd be fair to say that some of our competitors, one beginning with P, the other beginning with E, then decided that they would adopt similar strategies. They had lower targets, they achieved less, we achieved more. We keep on the path. So I'm saying to all of you MBA grads, come to KPMG, this is where it's happening. And then, you know, we're persisting with that. And the last thing I'll say, which is really where I met Jim first, was at the World Business Council on Sustainable Development. And both of us got heavily involved in the leadership of the World Business Council, the program, sitting on the Leadership Council itself for the organization, my colleague Brad at the back, who helps to run our network involvement with them. And as we've grown the business from 122,000 to 198,000, we've still noticeably reduced our carbon by net gains every single year. So I'm proud of what we've achieved, and I will continue to insist that we do more. which is why it's am.
Yeah, no, fair enough, fair enough. So Jim, you are and have been and will be a leader in this space. Just want to get it right. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So.
Thank you.
But and there are many stories that we could tell about your time at Duke Energy and beyond, and also working with government. But maybe choose one to give us a sense of what it means to be a leader in this space from your own experience.
Sure. First of all, I'm delighted to be on this panel with Michael. He's been a great leader, and I aspire to be as great a leader as he's been. But let me just share with you, you know, Duke Energy was one of the largest utilities in the country. And we had one of the largest carbon footprints in the world. We were second or third largest in the US. I mean, I used to start all speeches with three numbers that summarize Duke's position on carbon: 3, 11, and 41. We were the third largest emitter in the US, the 11th largest of all corporations in the world. And if we were one of the 192 countries in the UN, we would be number 41 based on our emissions. So that defines a pretty big problem. And I think one of the things you learn in life is when you're presented with a problem, or you have a problem, you have to run to it, you have to embrace it. So by talking about it, 3, 11, 41, I was saying, got a problem, I'm prepared to embrace it, address it. So what does that really mean? We had an industry that hadn't taken a position on this issue, and in fact, we're somewhat taking the approach of, well, we'll see how it goes. They might not regulate it, we'll be fine. But it became clear to me when you have a problem so big, you have to lead on the problem. I mean, I've spent a decade in Washington, and I learned a valuable lesson. When you see a parade form on an issue that's against your interest, you could argue carbon was against my interest, you can do one or two things. You can throw your body in front of it and let them walk over you, or you can jump in front of the parade and pretend it's yours. So, not to foreshadow, the bottom line is we made the decision to start reporting our carbon emissions early, which really led to our sustainability report. We started to try to create scenarios of how we would address it. We certainly, in all studies that we did about building new plants, we put various scenarios of carbon pricing, so we'd kind of understand what the implications would be for spending $2 billion or $5 billion on certain facilities going forward. But maybe most important thing we did is that Duke ended up becoming a co-founder of USCAP. And what USCAP was all about was bringing private companies in the US, several NGOs together, and we worked together and negotiated and created a blueprint, a cap and trade blueprint that we wanted to deliver to Congress to pass a law to regulate carbon. I was, of all the companies in the room, I had the highest carbon footprint, and I thought it was really important, so I got a disproportionate role in positioning on this issue. But in working with the NGOs, at the end of the day, we did find common ground. We put this together. It was called a blueprint. We presented it to Congress, and it became the Waxman-Markey bill, which passed the House in record time, in part because these different groups had come together and supported it. And then we got to the Senate, different outcome. Long story there, won't share it. But the important point is we didn't get it done, but we made progress. Contemporaneous is being part of USCAP, and this is kind of serendipitously, I was also the chair of our industry association, EEI. And I have been moving our industry toward adopting principles to support it. And the challenge for me is that at US CAP, we were operating under Chatham House rules, and so I couldn't share with anybody that I was working on this other proposal. So it came out in the middle of the negotiations of the industry, and you can imagine that 4 or 5 people said he needs to step down as chairman, because he's over here advocating a position on carbon regulation, and he should step down as chairman of the industry association. At the end of the day, the mutiny on the Bounty didn't happen, and I stayed the course as chairman, but within a month after the announcement of US CAP, the electric industry adopted principles leading to the support of the Waxman-Markey bill. So that was a situation where I took a leadership position because it was a big risk. I embraced it. And I also know the other rule in Washington. People are fond of saying, if you're not at the table for negotiations, you'll be on the menu. And so I thought it was very important to be there because I know the risk, the stroke of the pen risk associated with any kind of regulation or new law. So in a sense of the word, I was pragmatic. You can call that leadership or not. But I took a position that was contrary to the dominant position in the industry at the time, although the industry was evolving. But the important point, we put a stake in the ground, and while we didn't get it across the goal line, the industry's been working to solve the problem. And since 2005, which is kind of the date for the Clean Power Plan, since 2005, the entire industry has reduced their carbon emissions 25%. Duke reduced their carbon emissions during that time 28%. So we took action without a price on carbon, without any carbon regulation, to reduce our carbon footprint and prepare for a low carbon future going forward.
Brilliant.
It's fantastic. So as I think about this for both Michael and Jim, I mean, many of the leaders, the future leaders in the audience are thinking, well, how do I do that? And so I want to delve a little bit deeper into this. So Michael, when you walked into that board meeting the first time, and you didn't know what they were going to say, and how did you prepare for that meeting? And also, how did you persuade them? Tell us a little bit about the mechanics and what gave you the confidence? What did you do early in your career, or what about your upbringing gave you the confidence to think that you could go and do that, the first in the industry?
Well, the first time they rejected it, and
this is why it's good to ask the question. So it's not always easy, right?
Not easy at all.
Right.
And I went back 8 months later, and in between the rejection and the success, but it was a reluctant success because there were a lot of our board members who make up the 25 largest countries that KPMG operates in who were not convinced that this was a material issue. Now we're talking 11 years ago when to be, people like Jim were in a leadership position making a profound impact, but a lot of business leaders were not even, it was not even on the menu of discussion. And they couldn't necessarily see what the business advantage for us was. My argument to them was that you have to get out in front. You've got to get out in front because your client base is going to be demanding this. And because there are great people like Jim and many others, I think of somebody like Doug McMillan currently at Walmart and his predecessors before him, all of whom were driving for carbon neutral ways of distributing their products, of improving the performance of their stores, of making sure that their supply chains were sustainable. Those conversations were going way back into sort of 10 to 15 years ago. But you see, if you look at the big industry and the big finance corporations, everybody wanted to see solutions, but nobody knew what to do. So how did I win the argument? Well, the two reluctant ones, one was from Canada, the other one was, ironically, the other one was from the UK, ironically, and I had to do an awful lot of personal work on them both about getting to a position where what we wouldn't do and what they didn't want us to do was to buy carbon offsets. Because that would have been an easy way to do it. What they wanted was how are you going to achieve this 25% target when we're not going to buy carbon offsets, when we don't produce things that put smoke into the atmosphere? What are we going to do? And I had to explain to them the metrics around buildings distribution. Now, that is not something I necessarily understood, but I'm very good at persuading people of things I don't understand. And so that's supposed to be the story of my life, really. And I was explaining at a conference at Appalachian University yesterday, which is a great university, by the way, explaining to them yesterday that actually one of the greatest things you can have in life is enthusiasm. So you don't need to know the detail, you just need to tell people enthusiastically why it's right. And eventually they buy it. So that's what happened, actually. It took about a year to get it through, but once we got it through, we ran at that point.
And Jim, for you, I mean, you're CEO of a large energy company. You could have sat back and been second or third, to be honest, instead of getting in the front of that parade. Instead, you risk getting blackballed by all your industry friends who you've worked with over so many years, maybe people in your own company who disagree with you. And when you jump in front of the parade, a lot of people are going to say, oh, he's just doing that to grab headlines and it's not authentic. Look what a big polluter his company is. How did you think about that? Why did you do that? What was it about your background and sort of your career that made you want to jump in front of that parade?
Well, I think part of it is that I started my career as a consumer advocate, assistant attorney general in my home state, I was fighting rate increases of utility companies. And I'd been a federal regulator at the FERC. I kind of saw the world from a stakeholder perspective. And I also saw it from a perspective that if you see change occurring, because a leader's most important role is to look around the corner and try to see what's coming. And it became, I saw an increasing number of signposts that said this was coming.
That's right.
And we had great exposure to that issue. And so it's just a happy coincidence that leading up to being chairman of EEI, I had chaired the Environmental Policy Committee for 4 years and really worked with the industry to say we need to be proactive. We can't oppose every environmental regulation. We're in a better position to mold and shape it if we're leading on it. And so when I became chairman, and also because I started as a CEO of a small company, and over 25 years I did a series of mergers, I knew what it was like to be a small company, a mid-sized company, and a large company, and in industry associations, large companies dominate. So now I'm sitting there as chairman, a large company CEO, but I kind of remember what it was like to sit at board meetings in those other roles. And so the thing I did in January before that announcement came of the US CAP, I had gone around the room and asked every CEO in the room, small company, mid-sized company, large company, to talk about what they thought we should do as an industry. It took over an hour and a half to go all the way around the room, and it had never happened before that everyone was encouraged, invited to give their point of view. And what you discovered is people from the mid-sized companies and smaller companies kind of saw this as a bigger problem and were ready to, we got to do something. The big companies thought they could kind of bully their way through it because they had great capability working in Washington and the state capitals, that somehow we'd find our way through it. And at the end of the day, it was that consensus that came out of that broader meeting. And it was really all about giving everybody a chance to talk. And it became clear that we needed to move forward and embrace it because there was a broader view emerging. And I think it put the industry in a great place, and I think we're even in a greater place today. And I'd add one other sort of footnote. A lot of people say that power companies are dinosaurs. I've kind of heard that in kind of nobody even whispers it anymore. Come on, whisper it. But here's the interesting thing. While they've reduced their carbon footprint that much, preparing for a low carbon world, they purchased or own 100% of all the wind in the US today. They own 60%. Our contract for 60% of all the solar. So they've embraced this new technology and made it part of the technology that they deploy in providing electricity to people in the country.
I want to pivot a little bit to think about sort of the current political environment and some trends that might impact leadership from the business community. So in Europe and the United States specifically, a huge wave of populism has kind of swept across nations in Europe and also here in the US, and a lot of skepticism and lack of trust in the business community from lots of different angles. We're also really polarized on these exact issues that we're talking about today. And some people sort of are a little resentful that business leaders are getting involved on state policy issues in the US or lobbying against Brexit. How do you think about that as a business leader, engaging in a world where trust is low and our institutions, we're quite polarized? How do you think about that, Michael?
Well, shall I comment on Trump? You comment
Yeah,
on
we can
Brexit?
switch. Yeah, you can do Trump and you can do Brexit. Exactly. Yeah.
I'd be a lot more comfortable doing that.
Sorry, teasing you.
No, that's fine.
Well, I think the good news is, as far as the European political and business environment is concerned, we don't have a dichotomy between environmental responsibility. Everybody signed up to the Paris Climate Accord. Everybody is committed to it. The UK government had actually set carbon targets way ahead of Paris. It was under the premiership of Gordon Brown, who preceded David Cameron, that we had already had in 2010 a carbon budget requirement for every single department of government and for leading companies. So, and as we sit here at the moment, 52% of all the UK's energy comes from wind power at the moment, and virtually 100% of all Scotland's energy comes from wind power. So although we still need, and we all know for at least 100 years we're going to need coal carbon-based energy. There's no point denying that. We're going to need oil and gas. There's no point denying that. But we are moving intrinsically towards a low-carbon future, and the UK government just set a 2025 target for electrification of all vehicles, all new vehicle purchases in the UK. So there's no inconsistency. Brexit is one of those things that's kind of floating around on the edges of political crisis, put it that way. But when it comes to this issue, there is complete consensus between all the countries of Europe.
And Jim?
I, in a sense, think of myself as a populist. And the way I get to that conclusion is that in the power sector, we serve every home and every business and every community across the country. We're connected to every small town, mid-sized town, large cities. So we have a set of relationships that are in touch with how people are thinking, political leaders, other leaders in society. So we have a pretty good feel for it. And I think it's really important for leaders because, I mean, we had 28,000 employees. And so in a sense, when you're the CEO, you have a responsibility to speak for them, to speak for the communities. And we are very divided in this country right now. I mean, that's not new news. But that's the reality that we have. Huh?
You should tweet it. Get retweeted.
Yeah, what's more? But I think the thing is there's just some issues that you have to stand up for. Environmental is a no-brainer for a power company because we have probably such a great impact on the environment, not just in our plants, but in our transmission and distribution, et cetera. So we need to lead on that issue because of the impact we have. But I think a lot of social issues come up that I think we have an occasion to comment on. And I think we need to step up and take a position. And I took a position on same-sex marriage, as you know, the controversy here in North Carolina. And I really thought it was wrong to outlaw it here. And I got some hate mail, but by and large, I got strong support from the employees in my company and from stakeholders that I was in touch with outside the company. So I think leading on those issues is critical. We don't have enough leadership today. Our political leaders in the House and Senate are weak by historical standards. Won't even comment on the president. It's so outside the, don't even know how to go there. My wife, who is a good Republican and voted Republican forever, when she sees Trump come on TV, she goes into a rant. But I say that only to make this important point. People are more distressed now than they've ever been with our political leadership. And when you have such a void in leadership on important issues, I think leaders of corporations need to step up, fill the void, lead the way, and that will inure to our benefit and to society's benefit over time.
Thank you. So we have 2 minutes, so I want to give Michael and Jim a chance to offer some words of advice to our students in the audience, both based on your own experience and where you think the world's going. So Michael, we'll start with you. Any sort of final words of advice or parting thoughts for the audience?
Well, be conscious of this. I'm sure you all know this, that if you look at Puerto Rico right now, you see a country which was devastated by a climate-induced hurricane. That climate-induced hurricane has split the polar vortex above the North Pole, has caused now the enormous snow crisis we're having in Europe and the snow crisis that is happening in the northeast of the United States. Wake up to the fact that actually everybody is going to be impacted by this. And at the moment, here you have essentially a US territory that has remained for 9 months devastated without support. That will happen increasingly in other parts of the world. Your businesses will be affected. Your ability to do business will be affected. So all of us have to play our part in doing what we should do as advocates, as leaders, and as activists to make sure we not only get the message over, we live the message.
Fantastic. Jim, how about you?
That's a really great message. I just want to say ditto to that, because that's
great.
I mean, that was a perfect way to address climate. I mean, climate affects all of us. It's an issue we can all lead on in our different ways. And you see leadership today all over the country. In small towns, you see it in states. You just see an effort. Corporations. There's just a lot of people trying to do something about it. But from my standpoint, if I was in y'all's position, I would look for leadership opportunities, because it gives you a chance to make a difference. And you know, what purpose in life is there if you can't really do something where you make a difference and live with real purpose, live with you're authentic in who you are. And I think that leadership gives you an opportunity to exercise those muscles. And there are muscles that need to be exercised. You can read a zillion books about it. Interesting, important, but there's nothing like, you know, the man in the arena. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt had it right. You have to be in the arena. You have to be doing it. And those will be the lessons, whether you win or lose. Those were the lessons that will shape you and give you the greatest opportunity to live your life with purpose and make a true difference. And my hope for y'all is that each of you have a chance to lead and make a difference in our world.
Well, I want to thank Lord Michael Hastings and Jim Rogers for being here today, and the insights you've given people, hopefully in the conference, their MBA education will allow them to be leaders in that arena for years to come. So thank you very much, both of you. Thanks.